Hello, good morning. I hope your Monday is going well so far. I hope homeschooling's not too much of a battle for those of you that have to do it at the moment. And I hope we're not feeling too disheartened by the announcements yesterday that not a lot is changing at the moment. So last week we looked at parenting for faith for the first time, and I introduced it. And I introduced the idea of creating windows and letting your children see a glimpse of how you connect with God. I hope some of you managed to have a go at that. I hope you found it helpful. Keep going with it. See what happens is all I can say, really. If you want any tips or you're struggling with it, do get in touch and I'll see what I can do to help. The second tool in the Parenting for Faith is framing. So I have here a picture frame. Put my cup of tea down a minute. And we use a frame to put attention on something or focus or highlight something or someone. It might be a memory or a photo of someone we care about, but it brings the attention onto that thing. And we do this in lots of areas of life with our children, especially areas that could be dangerous for them. So for example, we say, hold my hand when we're crossing the road because the cars might come and hurt you. We say, don't touch the kettle. Yeah, not being good at that myself recently. It might be hot and might burn you or hurt you. It might be, shall we give grandma a ring or a video call because that might really cheer her up at the moment to see you and talk to you. We explain things that are happening and that we are doing in everyday life. But how often do we do that with God and the things we are doing with God? If I'm honest, I don't do it often enough. I sort of just assume that this is what we do at church, and at some point when she's old enough, Elise will understand it. But if I never explain it to her, how is she going to understand why we're doing what we're doing? And in more traditional churches, some things that we do look really weird and confusing to a child. For example, they might see someone worshipping with their hands up in the air, and they might not understand really why they're doing that. They might not really understand why we take communion. In other churches where they have incense and candles, they might think, what's that all about? So framing is about explaining how we are connecting to God, not just showing the connecting to God. That's the creating windows, is showing how we connect to God. Framing links to creating windows. It's about explaining what you are doing and why. So it could be explaining why we sing songs to God at church. It could be explaining a decision you've made as a family or as parents, and how God was involved in that decision so that they can see where God is in your life and understand why you've made that decision and how God is involved in that decision making. It could just be pointing out things you want them to notice in everyday life. For example, the trees on your walk and talking about God's creation. Or maybe even you see the cars going past and you say, wow, isn't that amazing? Cars haven't always been here. At some point, God put the idea for cars into someone's head and now we have cars. Isn't that amazing? And just making that connection between where God fits into our world that we live in. It's also about framing not just where God is in our everyday life, but about who God is and thinking about what he is like. And one of the ways you can do that is through framing the relationship between God and Bible stories. So as we tell a Bible story, we can stop at certain points and ask them maybe what they think God was feeling, thinking, or doing at that point. For example, I wonder how God felt when Daniel prayed to him every day. Or you can tell the story in a way that highlights the relationship between God and the character. For example, for the story of David and Goliath, you say, oh, David felt so strong and brave when he walked out to face Goliath because he knew that God was there with him. And it just, instead of just saying David went out and fought Goliath, it highlights that relationship that David had with God, and how God was there with him. So that's the second way. So the first way of framing is explaining why we do things, or explaining how God was involved in decisions, or pointing out or things in everyday life. The second thing is about explaining who God is through looking at Bible stories and telling them in certain ways. Sometimes our children might be asking their own questions and putting the frame onto an area of God in our world themselves, and they might be asking their own questions. When they do this, sometimes we can panic that we don't know the answer, or we're not sure how to answer their question, so it's theologically correct and we're telling them the right stuff. I have been doing lots of work at this at the moment, because running kids' church, kids come out with all sorts of questions sometimes. And I have discovered that the best approach is to follow the 4 questions that the Parenting for Faith sort of movement course recommends. So it's by using 4 questions to help answer their question, if that makes sense. So when they ask you a question, for example, did God create dinosaurs? First of all, ask them, what do you think? Find out what they think, and there might be a specific program they've watched or incident that's happened to cause that question. So find out where that question's coming from and what they think is the answer themselves. Once you've done that, start answering the question with them by asking, well, what do we know? What do we know from the Bible about this? What do we know from our experiences of God? Or is there a wise person we could ask to help us find out the answer next time we speak to them? And then you can ask someone else in the church, or another family member who maybe might be you deem a bit wiser than you, who might have their own ideas. So you start looking at the answer together by finding out, what do we know? The third one, which I think a lot of us often miss out, is what do we not know? It's important to be honest about the things we don't know and not to make things up. Okay? So it's really important that we don't make up the answers. Okay? And that we acknowledge that there's things that we do not know. Because that's part of the mystery of God, and part of our faith is about trusting and believing, even if we don't have all the answers. And it's important that they know that, and that not every question does have an answer. So be honest with what we don't know. And then share how you've handled this question in the past. So tell them how you've handled the question in the past and come to your own ideas. So I'm going to do a helpful example of that now. So if your child is asking, why has God let COVID and coronavirus happen? So the first thing you ask them is, what do you think? Find out what they think about that question and where's it coming from. Second thing is, what do we know? Well, we know that God is in control. The Bible tells us. He holds us in his hands. He's protecting us. But we also know that we live in a fallen world where there is sin and bad things happen and natural disasters happen. So we know that happens. What do we not know? We don't know if there are other worse viruses that God has stopped happening in the world. we don't know the exact cause of this virus. And we don't know how much worse this virus might have been if God didn't help and intervene and give people the idea to do lockdowns. And then share how you've handled this question in the past. So I have handled this question by reading my Bible and reading promises about God and his love for us and his care for us, and Noah's flood and how he's promised that he's never going to flood the whole world again, and his promise to look after us. I've also, I'm going to have to go in a minute. Elise is asking for mummy. And I've also just spent time with God, chatting to God about it and talking it through with him and being in his company and his presence to help me understand more about why this is happening now. And then once you've done that, decide on your next step. Okay, so have we answered the question? Well, sort of, but we don't really know why God has let this happen. Do we want to chat to God more about it? Ask them, do you want to go and chat to God a bit more about this question? Maybe we could read more in the Bible about God's promises and times when there have been disasters happen in the Bible and where God was in those. Is there anyone at church we could talk to about this coronavirus, to help us? Or shall we just leave this question for now and come back to it another time and talk about it another time? So those are the 4 steps. What do you think? What do we know? What do we not know? And then share how you've handled that question in the past. I hope that's been helpful. That was quite a lot, and this video was longer than the first, I think, and I was aiming for it to be slightly shorter, but I think it's important to go through and give an example of how to use those 4 questions with difficult questions, if that makes sense. So have a go at framing something for your child this week. It could be a question that they're asking. Have a go at using the 4 questions to help them answer it. Or why not just try and explain to them this week why we sing songs at church, if you haven't already, or choose an area of faith that they are interested in exploring at the moment and try and explain it for them and frame it for them. Share how you get on in the comments below. And do get in touch with any questions you have. I'll put a few links to videos on the Parenting for Faith website that talk about framing a bit more and talk about answering your children's questions a bit more. Hopefully you find those helpful. And I will be back next Monday with the 3rd tool in our series of Parenting for Faith tools. I hope you're all well. And I really hope we can meet up in person soon. If anyone fancies a virtual cup of tea or a catch up, do let me know. I'm quite an extrovert, so I'm starting to really struggle at the moment with no socialisation. So you'll be helping me out as well. Yeah, and Elise quite likes showing people her toys and things, so it wouldn't be in the way of that. So do get in touch if you fancy doing that. Even if we did it as a group or something, just let me know. Okay, I've gone on for far too long now. I am praying for you all, and do get in touch if we can do anything to help. See you all soon, hopefully. Bye.